"Get your things out of the bedroom. My parents are moving in." Those words slammed into me like a brick through glass. I stood in the doorway with my grocery bag still in hand, staring at the sight of strangers dragging suitcases across the hardwood floor of the house I had been paying for month after month. The garage door was open, and I could see boxes with my name scribbled on them stacked like leftovers no one wanted. My heart kicked in my chest, not from fear, but from the raw sting of betrayal. I set the bags on the counter, my hands shaking as I looked at Derek, my son, who couldn't even meet my eyes. Sienna, his wife, was giving orders with a smirk, directing her father where to place the armchair that once sat in my living room. My voice cracked as I asked, "What is this, Derek? What is going on here?" He muttered, "Mama, it's temporary. We just need a little space while they get settled. You'll be fine in the garage for now." The garage. I had been paying $4,800 every single month on this mortgage for 3 long years. I had given up my own home, poured $120,000 down, sacrificed every piece of security I had left to make sure Derek's family had a roof over their heads. And now the roof was being pulled out from under me, replaced with the comfort of Sienna's parents. I felt my face burn hot, the weight of humiliation pressing down on me. These were the same people who had smiled at me politely at holidays, who never offered to bring a dish or wash a plate, now dragging their furniture into my house as if I was the intruder. I could hear Sienna's sharp laugh cutting through the room. "It's better this way. Everyone will be more comfortable." She said it like a verdict, not a suggestion. Derek's silence was worse than her cruelty. It told me he agreed, or worse, that he had chosen this path long before I walked in with those groceries. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the staircase where once I imagined I would watch my grandkids run down on Christmas morning. Now, it was crowded with strangers, hauling luggage. The smell of their perfume and cologne filled the air, drowning out the faint scent of the bread I had just bought. Something inside me snapped. The trust, the promises, the long nights working double shifts just so Derek could have a better life, all of it crumbled like the boxes stacked in the garage. I realized in that moment this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a decision, and I was the sacrifice. I remember the day I let go of my old house like it was yesterday. It was a modest place on the edge of Houston, nothing fancy, but it carried 35 years of my life within its walls. Every birthday candle blown out in the dining room, every storm watched from the front porch, every late night spent worrying about bills and Derek's future. I sold it all because my son came to me with that hopeful look in his eyes, the one that always melted my resolve. He sat across the kitchen table, with papers spread out, talking about a new house in Dallas. 3 bedrooms, a yard for the kids, close to good schools. He told me it was the chance to give his family the life he had always dreamed of. I listened quietly while he explained, my heart already leaning toward yes before he finished asking. When he said he needed help with the down payment, I didn't hesitate. I pulled from the savings I had protected like treasure and wrote the check for $120,000. The promise was simple. In return, I would live with them. I would have a place in the home I helped create, a room of my own where I could grow old surrounded by family. Derek looked me in the eye and said, "Mama, this will always be your home too." I believed him. After that came the monthly grind. Every 4 weeks, like clockwork, I sent in $4,800 toward the mortgage. I cut corners, lived on a tighter budget, gave up the little things that once made my days easier. I told myself it was worth it. I told myself I was investing not just in a house, but in the closeness of family. There were nights when I sat alone, doing the math over and over in my notebook. How much had gone into that house? How many more months I would need to work through my retirement just to keep up? But the thought of hearing my grandchildren's laughter down the hall kept me steady. The sacrifice felt like love in action, the kind of love only a mother could understand. Looking back now, I see the weight of that choice. I gave up my independence, my safety net, all because I trusted words that were sweet at the time. I never imagined those words would one day be twisted, leaving me to stand in my own garage, surrounded by boxes with my name on them. It started with a letter from the bank that didn't look like the others. I had been the one handling the mortgage from the beginning, so I knew what the monthly statements looked like. This envelope was thicker, and when I opened it, my stomach dropped. The notice said the primary contact on the account had been updated. It listed Derek and Sienna's names where mine should have been. I carried the paper to the kitchen table and read it 3 times, making sure I wasn't mistaken. My name was still there, but only as a secondary contact. It didn't make sense. I was the one making the payments. I picked up the phone to call Derek right then, but I stopped myself. I wanted to hear his explanation in person. A week later, I brought it up casually while he was fixing himself a sandwich in my kitchen. I held out the letter and asked, "Do you know anything about this change?" He barely glanced at it before shrugging. "It's just paperwork, Mama. Sienna took care of it so things would be simpler for the future." He said it like it was nothing, then changed the subject to the football game. That answer sat in my chest like a stone. Simpler for the future? Whose future? Mine, or theirs without me in it? Not long after that, I began noticing the way Sienna carried herself in the house. She spoke about the place as if it were hers alone. "We should paint the dining room blue," she said one evening, her eyes skipping right over me, as though my opinion meant nothing. When I suggested keeping the neutral color, she smiled thinly and replied, "It's not really up to you, is it?" Her words stung, but what cut deeper was Derek's silence. He stood by the counter, chewing slowly, not saying a word. That silence told me more than any answer could. He wasn't going to defend me. He wasn't going to challenge her. At night I lay awake and replayed these moments in my mind. The small changes in paperwork, the subtle shifts in language, the way Sienna gave instructions about the house with no hesitation. It all pointed in one direction, and though I didn't want to admit it, I began to see the truth forming. The home I thought I was building for us together was quietly being turned into something else. It was during dinner when the knife finally cut deep. The table was set the way I had always kept it, with the same plates and glasses I had used for years, but the air in the room felt different. Sienna sat straight, her voice crisp and certain, and Derek sat beside her, quiet but present. She put down her fork and looked right at me. "This arrangement isn't working," she said. "My parents need stability and peace, and this house is where they belong. It's time for you to think about a smaller place that suits you better." For a second, I thought I had misheard her. I set my napkin on the table and asked, "Are you saying I should move out of the house I've been paying for?" She didn't flinch. "Yes, it's better for everyone. You've had your own apartment before. You can manage again. You're too set in your ways, and it's hard for the kids, and for us. My parents understand us better. They'll make the household calmer." Her words landed one by one like heavy stones, and every glance she cast across the table made me feel like a stranger. Derek didn't raise his eyes from his plate. He cut his meat into small pieces, chewing slowly as though he hadn't heard a thing. I tried to keep my voice steady. "I gave up my apartment to make this work. I put down the money, I make the payments. How could you even suggest I don't belong here?" Sienna leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. "Because belonging isn't about paperwork or checks. It's about what makes sense for the family. And right now, that doesn't include you living under the same roof." The silence after that was worse than the words. I looked at Derek, waiting for him to speak, to defend me, to at least acknowledge that what she was saying was cruel. Instead, he cleared his throat and muttered, "Maybe we can talk about options, Mama. Maybe it would be easier if you had your own space again." Easier. The word echoed in my head. Easier for them meant harder for me. Easier for them meant erasing the sacrifices I had made. I swallowed the lump in my throat and pushed my plate away, the food untouched. That night, sitting alone in my room, I could still hear her voice telling me I didn't belong. The walls felt smaller, the air heavier. The home I thought was mine had turned into a place where my presence was considered a problem. I was carrying the trash out to the curb when Yvonne, my neighbor from across the street, waved me over. She was a sharp woman in her 70s, with a habit of noticing things most people overlooked. Her voice dropped low as she said, "Margaret, I saw Derek and Sienna coming out of Henderson and Lowe's office last week. That's a real estate law firm. Do you know why they'd be there?" The name of that firm made my chest tighten. I shook my head slowly. "No, I don't," I answered, though the pit in my stomach told me I already suspected. Yvonne pressed her lips together. "I've lived long enough to know when something isn't right. You might want to check what's happening with your house." She gave my arm a squeeze before heading back inside. I stood there a long time after she left, staring at the neat rows of houses on our street. The sun was setting, but instead of the warm colors I usually loved, everything felt gray. I thought about that letter from the bank, Sienna's comments at the dinner table, and now this. Each piece fit together in a way I didn't want to see. Later that evening, I brought it up to Derek while he sat in the living room scrolling on his phone. Yvonne told me she saw you and Sienna at a law office. What was that about? He looked up quickly, almost too quickly. Oh, that. Just routine paperwork, Mama. Sienna handles most of it. Don't worry yourself. I studied his face. His eyes darted away, and his tone carried none of the calm reassurance I remembered from when he was younger. There was something clipped, defensive, like he was repeating a line rehearsed in advance. The room felt colder after that exchange. I walked back to my own space, my mind heavy. I thought about the conversations I had overheard lately, whispered between him and Sienna, cut off the moment I walked into the room. I remembered how she spoke about the house as if it were hers alone, and how he let it pass without correction. Yvonne's words would not leave me. The image of them walking out of a law office together replayed in my mind again and again. It wasn't just about rudeness anymore. This was about papers, signatures, decisions being made without me. As I sat by my window that night, I realized I was no longer just hurt. I was afraid. Afraid that the home I had built with every sacrifice was already being taken away on paper, piece by piece, while I sat under the same roof unaware. I woke up before sunrise with a heaviness I couldn't shake. The letter from the bank and Yvonne's warning played over in my head until I decided I needed proof, not guesses. I pulled the file box from under my bed, where I kept receipts, bank statements, and every mortgage stub I had saved. The stack of papers was thick, and each slip told the same story. My name had been the one tied to the money every single month. I opened my laptop, the old one Derek had set up for me years ago, and logged into my bank account. It was slow to load, but when the screen appeared, my breath caught. Alongside the mortgage payments, there were withdrawals I hadn't made. $2,500 every month, tucked neatly under a transfer labeled household contribution. The destination account was in the name of Collier, Sienna's family. My hands trembled as I scrolled back. It had been happening for 2 years. That meant $60,000 gone without my knowledge. I leaned back in my chair and pressed my palms against my face. I had given up vacations, new clothes, even small comforts to make sure that mortgage was never late, and meanwhile, money was being siphoned off in secret. It wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. I needed more than numbers on a screen, so I made a trip to the bank that morning. The teller knew me by name. When I asked for a detailed printout of all transfers, she looked at me kindly and asked if I wanted to speak with a manager. I nodded. The manager sat me down in a small office and explained calmly, "These transfers were authorized by a joint account holder. Your son and his wife signed the paperwork last year." The room spun for a moment. How is that possible? I never gave permission for them to touch my funds. He pointed to the form with their signatures. My name was listed, but lower down, almost as if I had been pushed aside on my own account. I carried the papers home and laid them out on my table. The withdrawals were bad enough, but something else was worse. Attached to the packet was a copy of the updated deed for the house. I scanned the lines twice before I let myself believe it. The house was listed under Derek and Sienna as primary owners. Sienna's parents were added as residents. My name was nowhere on the title. I sat still, staring at those words. My sacrifice, my savings, my years of steady payments, erased with the stroke of a pen. It wasn't just that they wanted me gone. They had already prepared for it, shifting everything in silence while I kept paying. By the time night fell, I had a notebook open on the table. I started listing the amounts I had given Derek and Sienna through the years. The loans for their cars, the money for the children's school, the down payment, the monthly checks, and now these hidden withdrawals. Line after line, the total climbed until it reached nearly $200,000. The number was so large it looked unreal on the page. I stared at it a long time and whispered to myself, "They planned this. They planned every bit of it." The hurt was deep, but beneath it, something colder took shape: clarity. For the first time, I saw exactly what I was facing. It wasn't misunderstanding. It was betrayal. And if I didn't act, I would lose everything. The papers arrived on a Thursday morning, slipped under my door in a plain envelope. I bent down, opened it, and found a formal notice with my name at the top. It was a demand to vacate the property within 30 days, signed by Derek and Sienna. My chest tightened as I read the words over and over. It was official. They were no longer whispering about moving me out. They were putting it in writing. That evening, I waited at the kitchen table until Derek came home. I held the notice in my hand and asked, "What is this, Derek? Why did I get this letter?" He sighed, dropped his keys on the counter, and rubbed the back of his neck. "Mama, it's for the best. Sienna and I talked about it. The house is crowded. Her parents are staying, and we need harmony here. You'll be more comfortable in a smaller place." More comfortable. The words scraped against me like sandpaper. "I have paid every month." I put the money down. "How can you tell me I don't belong here?" He avoided my eyes. "It's not about money. It's about peace. You argue too much. You worry too much. Sienna can't relax around you. The kids get nervous. We think it's better this way." When I pressed him, he raised his voice. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just accept it, Mama. We'll help you find somewhere else." The conversation ended with him walking away, leaving me at the table with the paper crumpled in my fist. That night, I heard Sienna's voice through the walls, sharp and dismissive. "She'll be gone soon. My parents deserve this space. They'll finally feel at home." The laughter that followed made my skin crawl. Over the next few days, the pressure grew. Sienna left rental brochures on my dresser, as if she was doing me a favor. Her parents began moving more furniture into the house, filling corners that once held my belongings. Even the children were coached to ask me when I was moving out, their innocent voices twisting the knife deeper. The cruelty wasn't loud, but it was steady. Every gesture reminded me that I was no longer wanted. Every silence from Derek confirmed that he had chosen his wife's comfort over his mother's sacrifice. I walked from room to room and felt like an unwelcome guest in the home I had built. The notice on the table was a constant reminder. 30 days. After 3 years of steady payments and decades of saving, that was the time they gave me to erase myself from the life I had poured everything into. I folded the paper neatly, slid it back into its envelope, and placed it in the top drawer of my desk. My hands were steady this time. The fear was still there, but beneath it, another feeling had begun to take root. Resolve. I stopped answering their questions. I stopped reacting to the little digs, the brochures left on my dresser, the constant reminders that my time was running out. Instead, I turned inward and let silence do the work for me. Derek and Sienna thought it meant defeat. What it really meant was planning. Each morning, I rose before the sun, made my coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. I recorded every payment, every check, every transfer. I stacked the bank printouts beside me, highlighting the withdrawals that had gone to Sienna's family. The numbers formed a mountain of evidence. $180,000 tied to my name, proof that I had been the one carrying the weight of the house. On Tuesday, I walked to the bank with the papers tucked into my purse. The manager I had spoken with earlier greeted me again, and I asked for certified copies of the account history. She gave me a concerned look but didn't press. When I left the bank, I felt lighter. The folder pressed against my side like armor. The next step was harder. I made an appointment with a lawyer recommended by a retired colleague. His office was small but neat, and he listened carefully as I laid out the facts. I told him about the down payment, the mortgage, the unauthorized transfers, and the recent notice to vacate. He leaned back and said, "Mrs. Holloway, this is elder financial abuse. You have strong grounds to challenge this in court." I nodded slowly, feeling both relief and grief at the same time. To take this step was to admit that my own son had chosen betrayal, but I also knew that doing nothing would mean losing everything. After the meeting, I didn't go straight home. I stopped at a small diner, ordered a sandwich and tea, and sat by the window watching people pass by. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel trapped. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was useful. It gave me room to think clearly, to see the path forming ahead. At home, I kept to myself. I let them think I was defeated, that I was slowly preparing to leave. I answered Derek's questions with short nods. I let Sienna believe her little triumphs had worked. All the while, the folder of documents grew thicker in the drawer beside my bed. At night, I rehearsed what I would say in court, the questions I would ask, the way I would hold up each receipt until there was no room left for doubt. I pictured the look on their faces when they realized I had not been quiet out of weakness. I had been quiet out of strategy. The house felt colder with every passing day, but my resolve grew warmer. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt in control. The courthouse was full that morning, not just with lawyers and clerks, but with neighbors and curious faces who had heard whispers about the case. I walked in with my folder tucked under my arm, each page ready. Derek and Sienna sat across the room, dressed neatly, whispering to each other. Her parents were there too, holding their heads high, as if they had every right to be in a house I had built. When the judge called us forward, I placed my documents on the table. My lawyer began with the numbers, clear and undeniable. Mrs. Holloway has contributed $120,000 for the down payment, plus 3 years of mortgage payments totaling $170,000. She has bank records, receipts, and transfer logs to prove this. The judge looked down at the stack of papers. Do the respondents dispute these records? Sienna spoke quickly. Your Honor, the payments were gifts. She wanted to help her son. It was her choice. I stood then, my voice steady. If it was a gift, why did you forge signatures to access my account? Why were $60,000 transferred to the Collier family under the label household contribution? I lifted the highlighted statement for the court to see. The room went quiet. The judge leaned forward. Is this accurate? My lawyer handed over certified copies. Sienna's face flushed red. Derek looked down at his shoes, his lips pressed tight. It should have ended there, but I had more. I pulled out the updated deed, the one that erased my name. This is the document filed without my knowledge. It names Derek and Sienna as owners and adds her parents as residents. I was not informed, yet the mortgage payments still came out of my account. Gasps rippled through the room. Even the judge's brow furrowed. Forgery, misrepresentation, and elder exploitation, he said slowly, his tone heavy. Sienna tried to recover. We just wanted stability for our family. She is difficult to live with. It wasn't malicious. I met her eyes and answered, You took my money, my trust, and my place in my own home. That is not stability. That is theft. The judge called for order as the voices in the gallery rose. Reporters scribbled notes. I felt the weight of eyes on me, but for once, it didn't matter. What mattered was that the truth was out. Derek finally spoke, his voice shaking. Mama, I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't look at him. The evidence spoke louder than his words. The silence that followed was different from the silence I had endured in that house. This silence carried power. It was the sound of everyone in that courtroom seeing them for who they really were. When the session ended, I walked out with my folder still in hand, my steps steady. I had not raised my voice. I had not begged. I had simply shown the truth, and it had been enough. The ruling came down a week later. I sat in the same wooden bench as before, hands folded in my lap, while the judge read from his notes. His voice was calm but firm as he declared the deed transfer invalid. The signatures had been unauthorized, the withdrawals unlawful. Sienna was ordered to repay the $60,000 taken from my account, along with penalties for misrepresentation. Her parents were to vacate the property immediately. Derek shifted in his seat, his face pale. The judge continued. Mrs. Holloway retains full rights to the property. Furthermore, the respondents are barred from accessing her accounts or assets moving forward. The words landed heavy and final. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the sound settle over me. For months I had lived with fear pressing against my chest, but now the air felt lighter. I had not been erased. As we left the courtroom, reporters swarmed the steps, microphones flashing, questions flying. I kept walking, my lawyer guiding me through the crowd. Behind me I heard raised voices. Sienna was arguing with her parents, her tone sharp and desperate. Derek stood a few feet away, staring at the ground, shoulders hunched like a boy caught in a lie. Back at the house, the shift was immediate. The Colliers packed their things in silence, avoiding my eyes as they hauled boxes to their car. Sienna paced the kitchen, slamming cabinet doors, muttering under her breath. Derek tried to smooth it over, telling her, We'll figure it out, we always do. But his voice carried no conviction. I didn't interfere. I moved quietly from room to room, reclaiming the space that had been stolen from me. I opened curtains that had been drawn, polished frames that held family photos, set flowers on the dining table. The house felt like mine again, not because of the ruling, but because I chose to see it that way. That evening, Derek knocked on my door. His voice was soft. Mama, I know you're angry, but we can fix this. We can still live together. Just give us another chance. I looked at him and answered slowly. I gave you every chance, Derek. I gave you my savings, my trust, and my home. And you stood by while they tried to take it all. I cannot give what I no longer have." He nodded, eyes glossy, and stepped back. For the first time, I saw him not as the boy I raised, but as a man who had made his choice. Sienna left 2 days later, her parents trailing behind. Derek stayed behind for a while, moving through the house like a shadow. The silence between us grew, until one morning I found his key on the counter and his note beside it. It said only, "I'm sorry." I folded the note and tucked it into my drawer. The hurt was still there, sharp and deep, but there was also relief. The house was mine again, and more importantly, so was my dignity. The days after they left felt strangely quiet, but not the heavy kind of quiet I had grown used to. This silence carried a peace I had not felt in years. For the first time in a long time, I walked through the house without glancing over my shoulder, without wondering who would question my place there. The space was mine, not because a judge said so, but because I had chosen to claim it. Still, I knew I did not want to spend the rest of my life fighting to keep walls that had already been tainted by betrayal. I met with a realtor the following week, a polite young woman who walked through the house with a notepad in hand. When she gave me the estimate, $620,000, I nodded without hesitation. Selling felt right. This house had been a battlefield. I wanted peace. The sale moved quickly. Within 2 months, the papers were signed, and I held the check in my hand. I used $400,000 to purchase a smaller condo in a quiet neighborhood, a place with a balcony that overlooked trees instead of driveways crowded with other people's belongings. It was modest but bright, and it felt like mine from the first step inside. With the rest, I made a choice that had been growing in me since the court hearings. I set aside $50,000 to create a small fund in partnership with a local charity aimed at helping older women facing financial abuse. I met with the director and explained my story in plain words. She listened closely and said, "You've turned your pain into protection for others. That matters." The rest of the money I tucked away carefully, building a cushion I had not felt in years. For the first time in decades, I wasn't worried about how to cover the next month's bills. The relief was steady, like a weight finally lifted from my shoulders. Life settled into a rhythm. I woke early, brewed my coffee, and watched the sunrise spill through the balcony windows. I went for walks in the park nearby, sometimes alone, sometimes with a friend from church who lived close by. The loneliness I feared so much never fully came. In its place grew something quieter but stronger, a sense of self I had nearly forgotten. Looking back, I realized the struggle had given me more than it had taken. I had lost illusions, but I had gained clarity. I had been forced to stand up in ways I never thought I could, and in doing so, I found a kind of freedom that no house alone could give. One afternoon in late spring, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Derek stood there alone, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his face drawn. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. He finally said, "Mama, I know I don't deserve your time, but I needed to see you." I stepped aside and let him in. He walked slowly around the living room, glancing at the plants by the window, the books stacked neatly on the shelf. "This place suits you," he said softly. We sat down at the table. His voice was unsteady. "I ruined everything. I let her convince me that pushing you aside was easier. I was wrong. I see it now." I listened, not rushing to answer. Then I said, "Derek, you hurt me more than you know. Not just with the money, but with the silence. A mother can forgive mistakes, but silence in the face of betrayal cuts deeper than words." He lowered his head. "I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know I'm sorry." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "I believe you are sorry, and I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. It means I choose peace for myself, and I wish the same for you. You have to build your life on your own now." Tears welled in his eyes, and for the first time in months, I saw a glimpse of the boy I had raised. He nodded slowly. "I understand. Thank you for at least giving me that much." When he left, I stood at the window, watching him walk down the street. My heart was heavy but not broken. There was pain in knowing the distance between us, yet there was also hope. Perhaps time would mend what money and betrayal had torn apart. Perhaps the simple act of facing each other honestly was the first step. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I felt the calm settle over me again. Justice had been served, dignity restored, and forgiveness offered. My life was no longer built on sacrifice alone. It was built on boundaries, truth, and the quiet strength of choosing myself. What would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven your son after everything, or would you have closed the door for good? Stories like mine remind us that betrayal cuts deep, but sometimes forgiveness is the only way to free ourselves from the weight of anger. Share your thoughts in the comments below, because every family story is different and your voice matters. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more stories, and let me know where you are listening from today.